Tonight we saw Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 3. The conclusion to the most boring trilogy ever made. Connor, what is the plot of Crisis 3?
In the aftermath of them fighting black monsters a la Shadow the Hedgehog in the last movie, now the Anti-Monitor is in full swing and he becomes super armored and he's control-alt-deleting the multiverse. So in a bid to stop him, Batman has to travel into the mind of John Constantine, who briefly showed up to figure out why the multiverse is in trouble in the first place. Meanwhile, the satellite people on the Justice League satellite are trying to stop the Earth from getting destroyed, and Superman and Supergirl learn from Lex Luthor the only way that they can stop it is by going to the Super Sun, because all the suns have converged into 52 suns. Because the multiverse shit's weird, but the 52 they really fucking is a weird number that DC's really fixated on. It's also the number of weeks in a year.
Wow.
So anyways, all the suns merge and Supergirl flies into the suns and kills the Anti-Monitor, and everyone's like, well, that's just great. Now how do we wrap this movie up? And he's like, well, there's actually like a fucking ton of Anti-Monitors, so the first hour and 10 minutes were pretty inconsequential. But we can travel to some pocket dimension where we can get a super device that if we were to activate the super device, we could like merge all the Earths into one, and the Anti-Monitor will fuck off because he's only around to like eat Earths, because due to what Constantine did, the Earths are dividing, and there was only supposed to be one, but they made it oopsies, and now there's infinite Earths. So the Anti-Monitor that we met doesn't really matter. It's just the Anti-Monitor that was kind of in the ballpark of the heroes we see.
Including Earths from other DC animated adaptations.
Yeah,
you get to watch the Super Friends fucking die.
You'd watch the Super Friends fucking die, and
Teen
Titans, and for some reason Batman the Animated Series or the DCAU circa Batman Season 1 and 2 due to the style of Batman and Joker. So but I think that was
Kevin Conroy.
Yeah, they pulled out some like archival audio or something because they claim he like recorded it, but it was so vague, and like they were claiming that Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League was his last performance until that game was a fucking embarrassment, so they just settled on finding like some archival audio, getting Mark Hamill to record like 2 lines, and then having Batman beat him up and then die with everybody else. But all of the cartoon multiverse eventually somehow like converges, or not really, because there's still like James Gunn's and the multiverse and stuff. So it was kind of inconsequential too, since it's all going into that DCAU or DCU reboot. But regardless, cameos galore and no main character to track. Not really a villain, since the Anti-Monitor is just like a mindless virus and there's like 1 billion of them. Yep. But Supergirl dies for a part, and Wonder Woman dies for a part, and Constantine evaporates with the Spectre. So Aiden, what did you think of Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 3?
Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 3 is the best of the trilogy. I think the art style in the DC animated universe movies is basically...
No, the animated universe was rebooted with Flashpoint.
Whatever the fuck this is.
Tomorrowverse.
I don't care. It looks good enough. The main characters look good anyway. There's about 8 million cameos because they're all on a space station. And for some reason, the superheroes didn't decide to save any like regular civilians except Superman's hole, and it's just loaded up with every superhero and supervillain imaginable, and every shot is just filled with mixed quality cameos where it's just like, oh, there's There's Cheetah in the background. She doesn't say or do anything, and her model looks kind of wonky because she's only in this one scene, but she's there.
Yeah.
But the main stuff looks pretty decent. This is the movie where, out of the three, where the most happens, which isn't saying much because especially the second one, nothing happens. And even then, the first hour and a half of this is inconsequential, where they fight the one anti-monitor and then there's a million more. But despite that, it kind of felt like there was a plot and things were moving and progressing, so it wasn't nearly as boring as the others. Hello, introducing Obi. New edition. Kind of off screen, but
Curtis and Lena have moved
he's on a
to my
journey.
girlfriend's house, but Obi and Darth have moved in, my dad's cats.
Hi, Obi.
There's always cats here. He's showing up. Well, he's been strategically dodging the camera. Anyways, what were you saying?
Yeah, it feels like the most is happening and still not a lot happens.
Yeah.
It's the most interesting and entertaining because there's plot progression. There's still some weird time wasting, like Constantine goes to the old cowboy bar and everyone goes and hangs out with him for a while.
They also just fight dinosaurs for 15 minutes.
Yeah, there's some dinosaur fighting at the start when the planet gets taken over by dinosaurs. But until the rug gets pulled on the anti-monitor stuff, it feels like it's building to something. And then they kind of pull the rug on you, and it feels a little bad. But, I guess there was some nice character moments with Supergirl sacrificing herself and her guilt. It looked nice enough. I don't know, having watched 3 of these, is this a very satisfying conclusion? I guess the last part where everything gets merged into one universe, kind of. But there's a lot of, even in this movie, it feels like it's pretty stuffed with filler.
Right.
It's the cleanest of the 3, but would I recommend sitting through the first 2 to get here? Not really. It's good enough as a conclusion if you've already suffered through the first 2 parts. But even then, I don't know if it was all worth it because the first 2 parts are pretty rough. So Connor, what'd you think of Crisis Part 3?
I'm gonna stick with the fact that the first one's the best. The second one has nothing going on, and this one also kind of just has nothing going on until the end, which all the Earths merge, but it doesn't really matter because this is all inconsequential since they're done with these movies, since they'll presumably make the occasional James Gunn animated tie-in movie or HBO shows. I don't know if this business model is really worthwhile unless you have a big story. I don't think the bi-monthly releases is gonna work the way it did 10 years ago.
This Tomorrowverse thing kind of just stumbles out because they're cheap to make and make an okay amount of money back off of diehards.
Yeah, but I mean the problem is they don't drum up the hype they once did. Retailers don't just have shelf space where you can throw a Justice League movie on the shelf so someone wants to buy it. Fans have to actively look for it on Amazon, and actually Target still usually holds these, but for how much longer the very few real retailers that actually do this shit is gonna last, it makes more sense to just invest in miniseries on HBO Max at this point, which is starting with Creatures Commandos, and I assume is what's going to happen. They're doing this in Watchmen because they're both 2 of DC's biggest storylines or miniseries, and
also the movies within this Tomorrowverse sub-franchise do better and worse depending on their source material they're adapting from.
Yeah.
And presumably the James Gunn ones will be take some notes from source material but be original projects that you have to put more effort into selling.
Right, but they'll also be sold off the back of
being connected.
Being miniseries, they probably won't be hugely connected to Superman Legacy, but connected in the same way She-Hulk is connected to fucking the MCU, where there's David Cornswite's Superman shows up for a 3-second cameo at the end of the last episode of Creature Commandos or whatever. But no, I think the biggest problem with this, I mean, I've never really been a fan of comic crossover events because the biggest problem is they either don't have a main character, or if they do have a main character, well, I should rephrase that. A lot of the times there is like the main comic that builds to it for like a year, and then everything else is tangentially connected, and that's how this feels. The problem is, it's not like they pulled old animated versions of characters together for what is essentially kind of a similar... I mean, it's similar to Crisis on Infinite Earths, but they try to do more, like, animation stuff. So, like, there's still Earth 2 Superman, there's still Supergirl sacrificing herself, Flash, Wonder Woman. Like, there's a lot of similar story elements, but they had, like, newer stuff that wasn't around when the original story came out, like Damien and Batman Beyond. Like, the problem is the cameos are so inconsequential to the actual plot that there's like, oh, here's a shot, you can see Peacemaker in there, I don't know if we've seen him animated yet, and here's this and that, and a million characters. There's Uncle Dudley, he gets zapped away at one point. Poor Uncle Dudley gets eliminated, who's from the Shazam universe in the Golden Age and hasn't featured in a comic in 80 years. And it's like, okay, cool, you know? There's a lot of cameos, there's a lot of random people, but what's it worth? It's also really hard to track because it's not like the comics, which, I mean, like, the Crisis comics were doing cameos from actual characters that have had actual stories. That are connected. So when a character dies, it's like, okay, that's Green Arrow of Earth 2. There's a million stories of him before he got replaced with Earth 1-1. It doesn't really matter that much. It's still cameos for cameo's sake. But in this film's case, it's a bunch of characters thrown together, original versions. Like, why not throw Kevin Conroy's Batman in there? I mean, I guess you probably couldn't, but I mean, you know what I mean. Throw in, like, some actual animated ones. Maybe, like, Apache Chief from the Super Friends. Like, play the fucking story high and loose. No, I'm saying, like, give him, like, the fucking Super Friends animation style, and he's fucking pissing his pants over the Anti-Monitor. Well, the Batman from Batman the Animated Series is there, and
Teen
Superman, you got, Teen Titans, Robin, and so on and so on. Because this movie, for like 4 seconds, wants to show these brief cameos of Super Friends and Batman the Animated Series and the Teen Titans Tower getting destroyed and whatnot. It's like, if you're going to do like a culmination of all DC animated projects, like, do that instead of just, we drew a bunch of characters that are in the comics, but to this plot and to the Tomorrowverse, they're inconsequential. And it gets confusing because it's like Aquaman goes back to Earth 18. So he's not like the main Aquaman, he's like some other Aquaman, I guess, and he gets zapped away. And it's like, who cares, because 5 seconds later we see a different Aquaman. But there's no, like, background material for these Aquamans, because it's not like an old animated version or
it's also
whatever.
Extremely inconsequential, because after Crisis on Infinite Earths in the comics kept going, and there was, like, consequence to it. This is the end.
Yeah, this is
anyone
the
who
end.
dies here, it's like...
Supposedly, I mean, as far as we know, if James Gunn said like a year ago this was kind of it for these, and that they were doing the Watchmen movies, and they'll do some multiverse stuff, which means that they might make like some other premium shit otherwise. But I don't think it'll be as common as the run has been for the last almost 20 years since they started doing these in 2007 consistently. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest problem. So like Wonder Woman Earth 2 comes up and she sacrifices herself. I mean, who fucking cares? We don't know her. And it's not like the Tomorrowverse went long enough to earn this. It's not like the Tomorrowverse is the one we've been following since 2007. I think the Tomorrowverse came out like at the start of COVID, and they made like 9 movies total before this series. I think it might be like 10 total movies in the Tomorrowverse, including the 3 parts of Crisis and Warworld, which is a prelude to Crisis. So 4 out of 10 of your movies are that. There's 1 Superman movie, a Green Lantern movie, the Legion of Superheroes one, and a couple other miscellaneous. But I don't know. I don't care about the Tomorrowverse enough. It didn't have enough time to build up. So when they do the tear-jerking ending, it doesn't matter. And the whole fucking second part was pointless. I mean,
Yeah, the
like
second part was pretty.
it was long and padded out, but it doesn't really play to a satisfying conclusion. Like the Earths combining into one Earth and kind of going into the next, like the mystery of how everything's changed in the DC universe. That's like the entire appeal of the comic, and seeing a bunch of people from old comics and stuff, and just having every DC character merged
We're
into
never
one.
gonna get that payoff.
That's the appeal. It's a 12-issue payoff to like 40 years of continuity, and ends up being a simplification method, which is what a lot of these crossovers are, and why a lot of them are
Yeah, the
kind of
Tomorrowverse-
bad without any build-up.
The Tomorrowverse didn't really need simplification, and
And
we're
I-
never gonna see that simplification.
Yeah,
Anyway.
and I thought the Tomorrowverse was fine, and it would have been a lot better, perhaps, with this movie if they went on for like 10 years, and then they said, well, you're at the end of your run, you got 18 movies out, let's do this trilogy and wrap it up. There might have been more faith to it. Or if they did the same thing with the same amount of Tomorrowverse movies and actually added in different animated versions of DC characters and like did your own spin on Crisis, a similar story. Because I mean, you could just do the Crisis story pretty much with just characters from other animated shows and whatever. Like, it's not that hard. I mean, you have to blend art styles, which might be tricky, but whatever. And at the end of the day, it just feels really inconsequential, and also adds to kind of my problem with the multiverse stuff, where you kind of they just kind of throw shit at the wall, and I'm just getting so fucking tired of the multiverse. Maybe it would be a cooler gimmick if we didn't get like Spider-Man No Way Home and blah 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 and whatnot. It's kind of just like the Infinity War and Endgame movie with worse pacing and less of a callback. Like, it would be like if Infinity War was like the third Marvel movie and 90% of the characters were never introduced before. It'd be the most confusing, god-awful bullshit ever. And that's what this is. I'm just sick of the multiverse, and I hope the trend dies soon. But we're gonna watch Deadpool 3 in like 2 days, so fuck it. Aiden, would you recommend Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 3?
No. If you haven't already watched the first two parts, you can't really watch this one. I wouldn't recommend watching the first two parts to see this one. If you've already seen the first two, I guess you're invested and might as well finish it off, but
Yeah.
that's pretty much the only scenario where this is going to be something that's going to appeal to anyone. If you're in too deep, you might as well end it, but otherwise, I don't know, man. Nah.
Yeah.
Connor, would you recommend Crisis 3?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, Aiden summed it up fine. Multiverse trend needs to die. Didn't earn the payoff. Needed more weight to it. Never gonna go anywhere.
Yep.
So, it basically lacks the entire purpose and everything of the original comic book storyline. So, what's the point? And in about a month, we're getting Watchmen Part 1. So, don't think... So we're going to have 5 DC animated movies on the end of the year list. Isn't
Yes,
that
sir.
exciting? Whippy! Hopefully it's a better adaptation than Zack Snyder's.